I found out I'd been erased from the family business when the security guard wouldn't let me into the building. On a Tuesday morning in October, I stood in the lobby of Callahan Imports, the company my grandfather had founded, the place where I'd worked since I was 16, and watched as the guard who'd known me for a decade called upstairs to verify if I still had access. "I'm David Callahan," I told him. "I'm the VP of Operations." I'd been gone for 3 weeks, a forced mental health leave, after missing our quarterly targets for the first time in my career. The guard looked embarrassed as he hung up the phone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Callahan," he said. "I've been instructed to escort you off the premises if you attempt entry." I didn't argue, didn't make a scene, just nodded once, turned around, and walked back to my car. As I sat in the parking garage, I pulled out my phone and checked my email. My company account had been deactivated. My corporate credit card declined when I tried to buy gas that morning. 37 years old, 15 years with the company, and now I couldn't even get past the front desk. I opened our family group chat, typed a message asking what was happening, hit send. The message failed to deliver. I'd been removed from that too. The strange thing was, I wasn't even surprised. The foundation had been cracking for months, maybe years. My father retiring early and handing control to my younger brother Michael instead of me. My sister Rebecca's growing influence in the company despite having no actual role. The whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. The invitations to family events that came later and later, sometimes not at all. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was being paranoid. Turns out I wasn't paranoid enough. That night, I sat in my apartment, the luxury downtown condo I'd bought with my Callahan salary, and methodically made a list of what I knew and what I needed to know. My father had called 3 weeks ago, suggested I take some time off, clear my head after we lost the Nakamura contract. Just a few weeks, he'd said, get yourself right. Michael will cover your responsibilities. No mention of termination, no suggestion I wouldn't be coming back. But the locks had been changed at my office, my email shut down, my name removed from the company directory. This wasn't an impulsive decision. They had planned this. I thought back to the family dinner 6 months ago, when Michael had questioned my strategy for Asian market expansion in front of everyone. Dad had said nothing, just watched as my brother undermined me. Or the board meeting where Rebecca, who technically had no position in the company beyond consultant, presented an alternative to my procurement system without warning. Or how my father had started excluding me from client meetings, saying they wanted fresh perspectives. The signs were all there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "David, it's Huang. Something weird is happening at the office. I thought you should know." Huang Li, my assistant for the past 5 years. The most competent person I knew at Callahan Imports, possibly the only person there who was truly loyal to me rather than to my father or siblings. "I'm aware," I said. "They've locked me out." "It's more than that," he said, his voice low like he was hiding somewhere to make this call. "They're saying you mismanaged the Nakamura deal deliberately. They're telling people you sabotaged it to hurt the company. Michael called an all-hands this morning to announce your termination for cause. Said there would be legal action." "For cause? Legal action?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They weren't just pushing me out. They were setting me up. "Thanks for letting me know," I told Huang. "Be careful. They're probably watching who contacts me." "Already thought of that," he said. "Using a burner. Call this number if you need anything. I care about this company, and what they're doing isn't right." After I hung up, I sat motionless for a long time, staring out my window at the Seattle skyline. The Callahan Imports building was visible from here, the blue-green glass tower my grandfather had built, the one I'd always assumed I would run someday. Not anymore. I'd never been a vengeful person, never been one for confrontation. My father had always described me as measured and strategic, which I'd taken as compliments. Now I wondered if they were just different words for passive and easy to manipulate. But something was shifting in me, a cold clarity taking hold. If my family wanted to destroy me, they would learn that I'd been paying attention all these years. The next morning, I didn't call my father or Michael or Rebecca. didn't try to plead my case or demand explanations. Instead, I drove to a small law office in Bellevue that specialized in corporate whistleblower cases. The lawyer, Eleanor Park, had represented a former Callahan employee in a wrongful termination suit 5 years ago. My father had settled quickly, too quickly. I'd always wondered why. When I left Park's office 3 hours later, I had a plan. Not a reaction, not an emotional outburst, but a carefully constructed strategy. My family had taught me well, after all. Never strike until you're ready. Never show your hand until you can win the pot. First, I needed to secure myself financially. I checked my personal accounts, still intact, thankfully. My family controlled the company, but they didn't have access to my private finances. I had about 6 months of expenses saved, more if I cut back. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but enough to get started. Next, I needed information. Proof of what I suspected had been happening at Callahan Imports for years. I called Huang from the burner phone he'd provided. "Need a favor," I said when he answered. "It's complicated and probably illegal. You can say no. Tell me what you need," he replied without hesitation. 3 days later, we met at a coffee shop 10 miles from the Callahan building. Huang handed me a flash drive. "It's everything I could access without raising flags," he said. "Financial reports, board minutes, emails. Most of it's routine, but there are some interesting threads if you know where to pull." "Thank you," I said. "Why are you helping me?" He considered the question. "I've worked at Callahan for 7 years. I've watched how your family operates. Your father's a good businessman, but not a good man. Michael's worse, entitled, reckless. Rebecca's smart but cruel. You're the only one who ever treated the company like it was more than just a personal ATM. The only one who cared about building something sustainable. I hadn't expected that. I'd always seen myself as just doing my job, nothing special. But maybe that was the difference. To me, it was a responsibility, not just a birthright. That night, I started going through the files Huang had provided. Most of it was exactly what I expected: routine business operations, financial statements, meeting notes. But there were anomalies. A subsidiary in Malaysia that appeared to exist only on paper. Large consulting payments to a company called Next Level Strategies that didn't seem to deliver any actual services. And most interesting of all, a pattern of transactions just under the reporting threshold for financial monitoring, all connected to accounts Michael managed. I didn't sleep. By morning, I'd identified 3 distinct areas of concern. Tax evasion through the Malaysian shell company, what looked like kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, and a pattern that suggested money laundering, albeit on a relatively small scale. None of it was definitive proof, but it was enough to justify further investigation. The next day, I met with Eleanor Park again and showed her what I'd found. "This is concerning," she agreed. "But it's not enough yet. We need internal communications confirming intent, documentation of who authorized these transactions, proof that they knew what they were doing was wrong." "I have an idea about that," I said, "though it's not exactly above board." Park gave me a measured look. "You should know that as your attorney, I can't advise you to do anything illegal." "I understand. But hypothetically, if someone were to have access to the Callahan Imports email system, and if that person were to search for specific keywords related to these transactions." She held up a hand. "I don't need to hear the specifics. Just be aware that illegally obtained evidence can't be used in court. However, such information might point us toward legitimately obtainable evidence." I nodded. "That's all I need." I called Huang again. "What I'm about to ask crosses a line," I told him. "If you're not comfortable with it, say so." "Let me worry about my comfort level," he replied. 2 days later, I had copies of internal emails dating back 3 years. Michael discussing the Malaysian subsidiary with my father, explicitly referring to it as our tax solution. Rebecca coordinating with Next Level Strategies, making it clear that the consulting fees were actually payments for directing business to specific suppliers that Rebecca personally invested in before Callahan signed contracts with them. And most damning of all, emails between my father and our CFO discussing how to structure transactions to avoid triggering anti-money laundering alerts, with my brother CC'd on every exchange. I brought everything to Park. She reviewed it carefully, made notes, asked questions. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair. This is significant, David. Criminal behavior, potentially. But before we go to the authorities, I need to know what you want out of this. Justice? Revenge? Your job back? I considered the question. Not my job. Not after this. I want them to understand consequences. I want what's legally mine as a shareholder. And I want them to know it was me. Park nodded slowly. All right, here's what we do. The following week, while my family believed I was still licking my wounds, Park filed a formal whistleblower complaint with the SEC, providing enough evidence to trigger an investigation but not revealing everything we had. Simultaneously, she initiated a shareholder lawsuit on my behalf, alleging that the other Callahan family members had breached their fiduciary duty by engaging in illegal activities that put the company at risk. The reaction was immediate. My father called twice, left voicemails demanding I call him back. Michael sent threatening texts. Rebecca emailed, suddenly concerned about my well-being, suggesting we talk things through as a family. I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. Instead, I met with a forensic accountant Park had recommended, walked him through everything we knew about the Malaysian subsidiary, the consulting kickbacks, the structured transactions. He built financial models showing the full scope of what appeared to be happening. The numbers were staggering, millions diverted over years. 3 weeks after filing the complaints, I received a settlement offer through Park. They would reinstate me at Callahan Imports, provide back pay for the time I'd been terminated, and issue a formal statement clarifying that there had been no wrongdoing on my part regarding the Nakamura contract. In exchange, I would withdraw all complaints and lawsuits, sign an NDA, and accept a position with no actual authority. I declined without countering. The next offer came 2 days later. A significant cash settlement, well above what I might expect to win in court, but with the same conditions about withdrawing complaints and signing an NDA. I declined again. My father called Park directly. Tell David to name his price, he said. This family matter doesn't need to involve outsiders. Park relayed the message with a raised eyebrow. Your father seems to believe everything has a price. He's right, I said, but not the price he's thinking of. The SEC investigation moved quickly once they had our evidence. They issued subpoenas for additional documents, interviewed current and former employees, and began examining Callahan Imports' banking relationships. The company's stock price dropped 15% in a week as rumors of the investigation spread. My phone started ringing constantly. My father, Michael, Rebecca, board members, family friends. I let it all go to voicemail. Finally, I agreed to meet my father at a restaurant downtown, Neutral Territory. He looked older than he had 3 months ago, tired, the confident swagger replaced by wary caution. What do you want, David? He asked as soon as we sat down. Whatever it is, let's negotiate. That's what business people do. I studied him for a moment. You know what's interesting, Dad? You never once asked if I actually did what Michael claimed. Never questioned whether your son might be innocent. You just moved to protect the company, your company. Not mine, never mine, regardless of how many years I gave it or what my last name is. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. It was a business decision. Nothing personal. I laughed, couldn't help it. Nothing personal? You destroyed my reputation, tried to bankrupt me, cut me off from my own family, and it was nothing personal? That's the problem right there. It should have been personal. I'm your son. What do you want? He repeated, face flushed with either anger or shame. I couldn't tell which. I want what's mine, I said. 20% of Callahan Imports, full voting rights, board seat, no restrictions. Michael and Rebecca get the same, you keep 40%. I want a public statement clearing my name. And I want the Malaysian subsidiary shut down, the kickback scheme with next-level strategies ended, and full cooperation with the SEC investigation. He stared at me. That's insane. If we cooperate with the SEC, we're admitting wrongdoing. The company could face massive fines, possibly criminal charges. Yes, I said. Those are called consequences. They happen when you break the law. I'm offering you a chance to control the narrative, to frame it as discovering problems and correcting them. The alternative is I give the SEC everything I have and let them tear the company apart. You do that to your own family? To the company your grandfather built? I leaned forward. You did this, not me. You chose Michael, who's been embezzling for years. You let Rebecca run her kickback scheme. You created the Malaysian shell company. And when you needed someone to blame for your declining profits, you chose the one person who wasn't stealing from the company. So yes, I do this. In a heartbeat. My father was silent for a long time. 20%, he finally said. But no board seat. Not yet. Prove you can be trusted again first. I stood up. Trust goes both ways, Dad. I'm not the one who's been committing federal crimes. Talk to your lawyer. You have 48 hours before I release everything to the SEC. I walked out without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep, adrenaline and doubt keeping me awake. Had I pushed too hard? Not hard enough? Was I destroying my family out of pride? Out of revenge? Or was this actually justice? My phone rang at 6 a.m. Eleanor Park. They've accepted your terms, she said. All of them, board seat included. They want to announce a corporate restructuring next week. Present it as a planned transition. I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized was there. Not relief exactly, more like resolution. Make it happen, I told her. The next month was a blur of legal documents, press releases, board meetings, and difficult conversations. My father announced his full retirement. Michael was quietly removed from operational control, though he retained his ownership stake. Rebecca's consulting role was eliminated. I returned to Callahan Imports not as VP of Operations but as CEO, a position I'd never expected to hold, at least not so soon. The company paid substantial fines to settle the SEC investigation, but avoided criminal charges thanks to our voluntary disclosure and remediation efforts. Some long-term employees left, uncomfortable with the changes. Others seemed relieved, like a cloud had lifted. Huang became my chief of staff, his loyalty rewarded with a significant promotion and equity stake. 6 months after being locked out of the building, I sat in the CEO's office, my office now, looking out at the Seattle skyline. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Family dinner Sunday? Your place. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the distance remain. But another part, the part that still remembered being a son before being a businessman, typed, 7 p.m. I'll cook. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can scar over, become part of you without defining you. My family had abandoned me when I was at my lowest. They'd tried to destroy everything I'd worked for. I couldn't forget that, wouldn't forget it. But I could move forward, build something better from the ruins of what we'd been. Not for them, but for myself, for the employees who depended on Callahan Imports, for my grandfather's legacy. In the end, the best revenge wasn't destroying what they valued. It was taking it back and making it better than they ever could. My name is on the building too. And unlike them, I intend to make it mean something.